Welcome to our channel. Today we will talk about Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the most courageous military commanders and the most powerful king in Europe. His life is full of victories, ambition, and controversy. Napoleon remains one of the most controversial figures in history. Some people praise him because of his genius in battle, his ability to lead, and his dreams for a stronger France. But others criticize him for his hunger for power and his role in wars that caused the deaths of millions of people. Some people thought he was so strict and ruthless that they even compared him to Hitler. But what is the real truth? Was he a hero or a villain? After hearing his story, tell me in the comments. Was he a hero or a villain? Listen carefully because this story is going to be very informative. You will not only learn a lot about Napoleon, but you will also improve your listening skills while following his journey. So, let's dive right into his life. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, on the small island of Corsica. This island was part of France, but it had a unique culture and history. Napoleon came from a family that was not very rich. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, was a lawyer who had worked hard to make a living. He came from a noble family, but they were not wealthy. Napoleon's mother, Letizia Bonaparte, was strong and protective. She cared deeply about her children and made sure they were well educated. However, Napoleon did not have a good relationship with his father. Carlo was often away, and Napoleon felt that his father didn't show enough love or care. As a young boy, he was very close to his mother, who was always there for him. People around Napoleon often made fun of him for being short. He was only about 5 feet 6 inches tall, which was shorter than most of the men in France at the time. Some people called him small or weak, but this only made him more determined. He hated being called short and wanted to prove that his size didn't matter. It didn't stop him from dreaming big. Napoleon believed that he was destined for greatness. At the age of 9, he was sent to mainland France to attend a military school. This was a tough time for him because he was away from his family and felt lonely. His classmates made fun of his accent because he spoke with a Corsican dialect, which was very different from the French they spoke. But instead of feeling sad, Napoleon decided to work even harder. He became an excellent student, especially in subjects like mathematics, which would help him later in his career as a military leader. At 16 years old, Napoleon graduated from the military school and joined the French army as a second lieutenant. He quickly showed his skills as a leader. But even though he had talent, Napoleon still faced many challenges. The French Revolution was happening at this time, and there was a lot of political unrest in France. The country was divided, and many people were fighting for power. Napoleon's big dream was to free his country from this chaos. He wanted to help France become strong again. He wanted to be in charge, not just to rule, but to unite the people of France and make them proud. This dream burned in him every day. Napoleon's early years in the army were filled with struggles. He had to deal with officers who looked down on him because of his background and his small size. He also had to fight in dangerous battles and was often sent on difficult missions. But Napoleon was smart. He didn't give up. He learned everything he could about war tactics, leadership, and how to win battles. He was always studying and thinking about how to make France stronger. One of the most important moments in Napoleon's early life happened when he was 20 years old. During this time, Napoleon was promoted to captain in the army. His first big chance to lead came during a battle in Italy. The French were fighting against a much larger enemy, but Napoleon led his troops with great skill and won the battle. This victory made people start to take notice of him. Napoleon was quickly promoted to general, a high rank in the army, at just 24 years old. This was very young for a general, but it showed how much trust people had in his abilities. At this time, Napoleon's dreams began to come true. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a leader with an army of thousands. Even though Napoleon was growing in power, he still had many enemies. Some people didn't like him because he was from Corsica and they thought he wasn't French enough. Others saw him as too ambitious, too hungry for power. But Napoleon didn't care what others thought. He was determined to succeed. Napoleon Bonaparte was now a rising star in the French military. He had proven his talent, but he was still not very powerful. However, everything in his life was about to change, not just politically, but personally. This was the year he met the love of his life, Josephine de Beauharnais. Josephine was 6 years older than Napoleon. At the time they met, she was 32 years old, and Napoleon was 26. She was a widow, as her first husband had been executed during the French Revolution. She had 2 children, and she was known for her beauty, charm, and elegance. Napoleon was completely captivated by her. Even though she was older, he didn't care. He fell deeply in love with her the moment he saw her. Josephine was different from other women he had met. She was graceful, confident, and mysterious. She knew how to charm people, and she had many admirers. At first, she didn't take Napoleon seriously. He was younger, not very rich, and not yet very powerful. But Napoleon was persistent. He wrote her passionate love letters, expressing how much he adored her. Even when he was away on military campaigns, he would write to her constantly. He would tell her how much he missed her, how he dreamed of being with her, and how much he loved her. In one of his letters he wrote, "Since I left you, I have been constantly sad. My happiness is to be near you. In the midst of my soldiers, my thoughts drift to you, my beloved. I love you more each day, and I long for your touch." His love for Josephine was so deep that sometimes it distracted him from his work. But Josephine was not as deeply in love as Napoleon was. She enjoyed the attention but did not have the same intense feelings. However, Napoleon was determined to marry her, and in 1796, he succeeded. They got married on March 9, 1796, in a civil ceremony in Paris. Just 2 days after the wedding, Napoleon had to leave for battle. Napoleon was sent to Italy to lead the French army. France was at war with Austria, and Italy was the battleground. This was the first time Napoleon would have full command of an army. At this time, the French army in Italy was weak, poorly supplied, and demoralized. The soldiers had very little food and no proper weapons. Many generals before Napoleon had failed in Italy. But Napoleon had something that others did not: brilliant strategy and confidence. He transformed the army. He gave powerful speeches, making the soldiers believe they could win. He moved quickly and attacked the Austrians and their allies before they were ready. His tactics were so unpredictable that his enemies never knew what to expect. From 1796 to 1797, Napoleon won a series of brilliant victories. Battle of Lodi. He personally led his troops across a bridge under heavy fire, proving his courage. Battle of Arcole. He grabbed a flag and ran straight toward enemy lines, inspiring his soldiers. Battle of Rivoli. He completely defeated the Austrians, forcing them to surrender. These victories made Napoleon a national hero. His soldiers adored him, and France now saw him as a true military genius. But even on the battlefield, Napoleon never stopped thinking about Josephine. However, Josephine was not as faithful as Napoleon. She had started an affair with another man while Napoleon was away. When Napoleon found out, he was heartbroken, but his love for Josephine was so strong that he forgave her. After his success in Italy, the French government gave Napoleon a new mission: to invade Egypt, when he was 28 years old. At this time, Britain was France's biggest enemy. Britain controlled India, which was a very rich colony. Napoleon wanted to cut off Britain's trade route to India, so he decided to take over Egypt, which was an important link between Europe and Asia. Napoleon set sail with a large army and many scientists. He wanted not just to conquer, but also to bring French culture and knowledge to Egypt. The Battle of the Pyramids, 1798. In one of his most famous battles, Napoleon's army faced the Mamluks, the rulers of Egypt. The Mamluks were fierce warriors, but they fought using old methods. Napoleon used modern strategies, and the French won easily. Napoleon entered Cairo, the capital of Egypt, as a great conqueror. But then disaster struck. The British Navy, led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, destroyed Napoleon's fleet in the Battle of the Nile. Now Napoleon and his army were trapped in Egypt. He could not return to France by sea. Meanwhile, back in France, the government was weak and corrupt. Napoleon saw an opportunity. He secretly left Egypt and returned to France, leaving his army behind. When Napoleon arrived in Paris, France was in chaos. The government was failing, and people had lost trust in their leaders. Napoleon knew this was his moment. On November 9, 1799, Napoleon led a coup d'etat, meaning he overthrew the government by force. He took control and made himself first consul, the most powerful man in France. He was only 30 years old, but now he ruled France. Now that Napoleon was in power, he wanted to make France strong again. He made many changes. He fixed the economy by creating a strong financial system. He made new laws called the Napoleonic Code, which gave people more rights. He built schools and encouraged education. Napoleon also continued winning battles. In 1800, he defeated the Austrians again in the Battle of Marengo. The people of France loved him. They saw him as a leader who could bring stability and greatness to France. Napoleon Bonaparte was no longer just a military general or a political leader. On December 2, 1804, he became Emperor of France in a grand ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. But this coronation was different from any other. Usually, when a new king or emperor was crowned, the Pope would place the crown on his head as a symbol that the ruler was chosen by God. But Napoleon refused to let the Pope crown him. At the last moment, he took the crown himself and placed it on his own head. "I am not chosen by God or by any religious authority. I take my power with my own hands. I rule because of my own strength, not because of tradition." It was a bold move, and it shocked many people. But Napoleon had a clear vision. He wanted to build a powerful empire, stronger than any other in Europe. His wife Josephine was crowned as empress, standing beside him. Even though she had been unfaithful in the past, Napoleon still loved her deeply. But soon their relationship would face more problems. As soon as Napoleon became emperor, the rest of Europe became nervous. Countries like Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia saw him as a threat. They feared that he would try to conquer all of Europe, and they were right. Napoleon wanted to expand the French Empire and defeat Britain, France's biggest enemy. But Britain had the strongest navy in the world. Napoleon knew that he could not defeat Britain at sea, so he decided to focus on land battles instead. Napoleon's enemies, Austria and Russia, joined forces to defeat him. They had a huge army of 90,000 soldiers, while Napoleon had 68,000. Many thought Napoleon would lose, But he had one of the greatest military minds in history. He used a brilliant strategy. He made it look like his army was weak and pretended to retreat. The Austrian and Russian armies fell into his trap. Then, at the perfect moment, Napoleon attacked from the sides and the center. His soldiers fought with incredible skill and speed. The result, a massive victory for Napoleon. Over 36,000 Austrian and Russian soldiers were killed or captured. The Austrian emperor was forced to surrender. Napoleon became the undisputed ruler of Europe. This battle is still studied in military academies today. It showed Napoleon's genius as a commander. After the victory, Napoleon told his men, "Soldiers, I am proud of you. This is one of the greatest victories in history. You have won the love of France." His soldiers adored him. They believed he was invincible. Napoleon could not defeat Britain in battle, so he tried another strategy: economic warfare. He created the continental system, a rule that banned all European countries from trading with Britain. His goal, to ruin Britain's economy by cutting off its trade. But the plan had problems. Many countries secretly ignored the rule and continued to trade with Britain. Plus, France itself suffered, as businesses could not get the goods they needed. Napoleon's strategy failed, and Britain remained strong. 1807, the war against Russia and Prussia. Now Napoleon turned his attention to Russia and Prussia. In the Battle of Jena Auerstedt, 1806, he completely crushed the Prussian army. The Prussian king had to surrender, and Napoleon's power grew. But his biggest challenge was Russia. The Russians were tough warriors. Their country was huge, and their army was strong. But Napoleon was ready. In 1707, he defeated the Russian army in the Battle of Friedland. After this victory, Tsar Alexander I of Russia had no choice but to sign a peace treaty with Napoleon. Now, almost all of Europe was under Napoleon's control. At this point, he was at the height of his power. France was the strongest country in Europe. Napoleon's empire was expanding every year. He was seen as a legendary leader. But power comes with problems. Napoleon had everything: power, wealth, and victory. But one thing was missing. He had no heir. Josephine had never given him a child. This was a big problem because every emperor needed a son to continue his dynasty. Napoleon loved Josephine, but he needed an heir more than anything. So in 1809, he made a painful decision. He divorced Josephine. Even though he still loved her, he knew that he had to marry someone else to have children. This was heartbreaking for both of them. When Josephine left the palace, she cried uncontrollably. Napoleon later said, "Josephine, you were the only woman I truly loved." Napoleon needed a political alliance, so he married Marie Louise, the daughter of the Emperor of Austria. She was 18 years old, while Napoleon was 41. 1 year later, in 1811, Marie Louise gave birth to Napoleon's son, who was named Napoleon II. Napoleon was overjoyed. He finally had an heir to continue his empire. But just as his personal life became stable, his empire was about to collapse. Napoleon made the biggest mistake of his career. He invaded Russia. Russia had broken the peace treaty, and Napoleon wanted to punish them. But he underestimated the Russian winter. He marched into Russia with 600,000 soldiers, but the Russians used a clever strategy. They burned their own cities and food supplies, so Napoleon's army had nothing to eat. The French soldiers froze to death in the brutal Russian winter. By the time Napoleon returned to France, he had lost more than 500,000 men. This was the beginning of his downfall. After Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812, his enemies saw a golden opportunity. The once invincible French army was weakened, and Europe's most powerful nations were ready to take revenge. A new alliance was formed against him, known as the Sixth Coalition, which included Britain, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and Spain. Napoleon, despite losing 500,000 soldiers in Russia, refused to give up. He quickly built a new army with fresh recruits. These were young, inexperienced soldiers, but they were inspired by Napoleon's unbreakable spirit. He told them, "Soldiers, we may have lost battles, but we have not lost our honor. France still stands strong, and I will lead you to victory." But this time, Napoleon was facing all of Europe. Napoleon's biggest battle was fought in Leipzig, Germany, in October 1813. Napoleon had 200,000 soldiers. The coalition army had 350,000 soldiers. It was the largest battle in Europe before World War I. For 3 days, the French army fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. Napoleon tried every possible strategy, but his enemies surrounded him from all sides. His own allies betrayed him. The Saxons, who were fighting for Napoleon, switched sides in the middle of the battle and started attacking the French. This was a disaster. Napoleon had no choice but to retreat. As the French army tried to escape, a bridge was destroyed too soon, leaving thousands of French soldiers trapped. Napoleon watched in horror as his men drowned in the river or were slaughtered by the enemy. By the end of the battle, Napoleon had lost 80,000 soldiers. His empire was falling apart. After this crushing defeat, the coalition forces invaded France. The enemy armies marched into Paris. The people of France, who once saw Napoleon as a hero, now blamed him for their suffering. His generals told him, "Emperor, we cannot fight anymore. We must surrender." Napoleon was heartbroken. He had dedicated his entire life to France, and now, even his most loyal men had lost faith in him. On April 6, 1814, Napoleon abdicated, gave up his throne. For the first time in 20 years, Napoleon was no longer the ruler of France. But his enemies did not kill him. Instead, they exiled him to a small island called Elba, near Italy. Napoleon, the man who once ruled Europe, was now a prisoner on a tiny island. As he boarded the ship to Elba, he told his men, "France, I have given you everything, and now I must leave you." He cried as he waved goodbye to his soldiers. It seemed like the end of Napoleon's story. But Napoleon was not a man who accepted defeat. After just 10 months on Elba, Napoleon heard shocking news. The new French king, Louis XVIII, was unpopular. People missed Napoleon. The army was still loyal to him. So Napoleon escaped from Elba and returned to France. When he arrived on the shores of France with just 1,000 soldiers, he marched toward Paris. The French king sent an army to stop him, but when Napoleon stood before them, he opened his coat and said, "If any man wants to kill his emperor, here I am." There was silence. The army joined him. Within 20 days, Napoleon marched into Paris as emperor again. It was one of the most incredible comebacks in history. The people celebrated. They believed Napoleon would bring back the glory of France, but his enemies were furious. The coalition powers, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, declared that Napoleon was a threat to the world. They gathered their armies for a final battle. Napoleon's return would last only 100 days. On June 18, 1815, Napoleon faced the British and Prussian armies near the village of Waterloo in present-day Belgium. This was the battle that would decide everything. Napoleon had 72,000 soldiers. The British and Prussian forces had 118,000 soldiers. Napoleon had one last chance to defeat his enemies and reclaim Europe. At first, Napoleon's troops fought bravely and pushed back the British army. But then, disaster struck. A huge rainstorm turned the battlefield into mud. Napoleon's cannons got stuck, slowing down his attack. Then the Prussian army arrived, and Napoleon's army was surrounded. The French fought until the very last moment, but by the evening it was clear. Napoleon had lost. His dreams of ruling Europe again were over. As his army collapsed, Napoleon rode away, knowing it was the end. After his defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon surrendered to the British. This time, they did not send him to a nearby island. They sent him far away to St. Helena, a remote island in the Atlantic Ocean. There was no escape this time. Napoleon spent 6 years on St. Helena. He had no army, no power, and no hope of returning. At first, he spent his time writing memoirs about his life. He wanted to tell the world his side of the story. He wrote about his victories, his love for France, and the mistakes he made. But as the years passed, his health started to decline. His body became weak. He suffered from constant stomach pain. His hair started falling out. He could no longer ride horses or walk for long. He spent most of his time sitting and thinking. One of his few joys was talking about his past. His followers on the island listened to his stories, amazed by the man who once ruled half of Europe. One day, he looked out at the endless ocean and said, "I was born on an island, and I am dying on an island." Napoleon knew his time was ending. On the morning of May 5th, 1821, Napoleon could barely speak. His final words were, "France, army, head of the army, Josephine." At 5:49 p.m., Napoleon Bonaparte died. The great emperor who once controlled Europe, who had fought against the world's greatest armies, now lay in a simple bed, thousands of miles away from his homeland. The British buried him on St. Helena under a simple tombstone. But before he died, Napoleon had told his close friends, "I wish to be buried in Paris, near the Seine, among the French people I loved so much." His wish would be fulfilled, but not yet. 19 years after his death in 1840, the French people demanded that Napoleon's body be brought back to France. King Louis-Philippe of France sent a ship to St. Helena. When Napoleon's remains returned to Paris, thousands of people gathered to honor him. His coffin was placed on a golden carriage, and his body was carried through the streets. People wept and cheered his name, "Vive l'Empereur! Long live the Emperor!" Napoleon was finally buried at Les Invalides, a magnificent tomb in the heart of Paris, where he still rests today. Even in death, Napoleon remained a legend. Napoleon's life was filled with great victories and great failures. But from his journey, we can learn some powerful lessons. 1. Dream big, start small. Napoleon was born on a small island, Corsica. People made fun of him, calling him short and weak, but he never let their words stop him. He once said, "The battlefield is a stage where the smallest man can become the greatest. No matter where you come from, your dreams can take you anywhere." 2. Hard work beats talent. Napoleon wasn't born a genius, but he worked harder than everyone else. He studied day and night. He read every book on war. He planned every move carefully. He once said, "Victory belongs to the most persevering. It's not about how smart or talented you are, it's about how hard you work." 3. Never fear. Failure. Napoleon faced huge defeats, Russia, Leipzig, and Waterloo. But every time he stood up again. Even after being exiled, he returned to France and ruled for 100 more days. He believed, courage isn't having the strength to go on. It's going on when you have no strength. Failure is not the end. The only real failure is giving up. 4. Lead by example. Napoleon didn't just command his soldiers. He stood with them. When his men were cold, he slept in the snow. When they were hungry, he ate the same food as them. Because of this, his soldiers would follow him anywhere. If you want people to follow you, show them the way. 5. Learn from your mistakes. Napoleon's greatest mistake was his hunger for power. He ignored warnings about Russia. He trusted the wrong people. He thought he could win forever. This cost him everything. He once admitted, "I have made mistakes. I have seen the limits of my power. Power, success, and fame are temporary. The real victory is knowing when to stop." Napoleon was a hero to some and a villain to others. To France, he was a leader who gave them glory and power. To Europe, he was a threat who started endless wars. But no matter what people think, his name still echoes through history. He changed laws, redefined warfare, and inspired millions. Even today, his tactics are studied in military schools around the world. He proved that one man with a vision can change the world. And now I ask you, was Napoleon a hero or a villain? Tell me in the comments.